Begin by inviting you to make the declaration set out in Article 64, Paragraph B of the Rules of Court.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I solemnly declare upon my honor and conscience that I will speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and that my statement will be in accordance with my sincere belief.
I thank you. Before beginning the cross-examination and re-examination, I'd like to remind counsel, as well as the expert, to speak at an appropriate slow pace for the benefit of the interpreters. Professor Newton, the usher will give you your statement and reports as provided to the court by the Gambia.
Thank you.
I now give the floor to counsel for the Gambia, Mr. Paul Leichler, who will ask the expert to confirm his written statement as well as his two previous reports provided as annexes to the Gambia's pleadings. Mr. Reichler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Professor Newton.
Good afternoon.
You prepared signed reports which were submitted to the court in October 2020 and May 2024, and you submitted an affidavit dated 18 November 2025. Do you confirm the accuracy and the correctness of everything that is in those two reports and in your affidavit?
Yes, sir, I do.
Are there any corrections that you wish to make?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reichler. I now give the floor to counsel for Myanmar, Mr. David Hopper, for cross-examination.
And good afternoon to you, Professor Newton. Your statement at tab 4 summarizes your two earlier reports. And in your first report, at paragraphs 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, you set out your extensive experience as a professional soldier, rising to the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army. And you set out your subsequent academic career as a professor of the practice of law at Vanderbilt University in the United States, where you teach. And you tell us that you specialize, in particular, on the application of international law to armed conflict. And you give extensive examples of your application in that field. Is that correct? Is that correct, sir?
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. Yes, sir, it is.
Right, thank you. Right. And today, I appreciate you're a professor of law, but you come into court, as I understand it, with your military hat on, as a military expert. Is that right?
Partially correct, yes.
All right, we'll come to that.
Let me interrupt. Professor Newton, maybe it's better to have a headphone on now.
Right. Is it working? Good.
Thank you.
Is this working? I think it is. Oh, thank you. And in that capacity as an expert, you come in order to instruct the court, in your expert opinion, as to whether the clearance operations conducted by Myanmar's armed forces in Rakhine State from 2016 to 18 can be described as bona fide counter-insurgency operations. Is that correct?
I think I use the word authentic in places, but I'll take bona fide as a synonym. So yes, sir.
Good. Now, as a lawyer, you know, as we all do, that as an expert you come to this court, to furnish it with information which is likely to be outside the court's own experience and knowledge. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And may I say, I fully accept that you have the necessary expertise to instruct this court on those military matters and to provide your opinion on them. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
As an expert, of course, your duty to the court is to give your opinion objectively and without bias. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that your duty to this court overrides any other duty to any party in the case. Do you accept that?
Yes, sir.
And do you consider that you have discharged those duties in these reports?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, do you consider that in writing those reports that you have discharged your obligation to the court to give your opinion objectively and without bias?
Yes, sir. Those reports are over my signature, and I take that very seriously.
Right. Now, I need to trace the manner in which your opinion is formed in the history of these reports. It appears to have it seems that your opinion appeared fully formed, as it were, right from the get-go, from the very first report. Is that right?
You're referring to my first opinion?
Yeah, and your opinion, which has been unwavering, we can see quite clearly expressed in your first report. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Your first report is dated October 2020. Can you be more specific? Or more particularly, can I ask you this? When were you first instructed by the Gambia? Can you recall?
No, sir.
Was it a month or months before?
I don't recall.
Right, well, in the Gambia's memorial, it references your report at its at paragraph 359 in the Gambia memorial. It states this: Professor Newton reviewed the evidence gathered and analysed by the UN fact-finding mission and reached the same conclusions, that the clearance operations were planned in advance at the highest levels of the military hierarchy and carried out in conformity with orders passed down through the chain of command. That was the first part of it. Now, just pausing there, what you say there, that's the very nature of military command, is it not?
Yes, sir.
All right. In the second part of their summary, they say the manner in which they were executed demonstrates that their purpose was not counterinsurgency, because they violated the most fundamental principles and practices of counterinsurgency operations. Is that correct? That was a summary of your opinion.
A brief summary, but essentially correct, yes.
Well, we need to be brief because I have a brief time with you. All right. Thirdly, the only reasonable conclusion that can be drawn from the evidence is that the clearance operations were aimed at the Rohingya population as a whole, and that their purpose, you write, was to destroy it. Do you remember writing that?
Or words to that effect, yes, sir.
Right. And at that stage, and we're talking about the first report, tab 5, in the judge's bundle. At that time, you had, and you specify, several documents which you list in your paragraph 2 in that first report. It includes the UN fact-finding mission and a few other reports. May I ask you, did you also have a draft of the Gambia's memorial?
No, sir. Ever.
At no time?
At no time.
So you didn't read the memorial before you composed your opinion?
No, sir. There was no opportunity. I was instructed telephonically. I agreed to take on this matter on the question posed. I researched. I read the entire FFM was the first thing I read, and I wrote my opinion on the basis of my own independent research and study.
All right. But you did discuss, obviously, what your brief was with the Gambia.
I don't recall. I think I may have given them an indication of. I don't recall. I just don't.
Now, clearly, your first report and the opinion reached in that report is entirely based on the representation of facts and opinions found in those documents that you read. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I had no fact-finding ability, so I relied on the facts as stated in the FFM, the full FFM.
Indeed, the memorial states as much, because it states explicitly, it's chapter 12, paragraph 117, based on the reports of the UN fact-finding mission, Professor Newton concludes, etc., etc. That's correct.
I take your word for it, sir.
Now let me come first to the military term, as I understand it is entirely a military term, COIN, C-O-I-N. It's not an acronym, it's a contraction of the two words counter-insurgency. And use of that word appears to be relatively recent. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Could not pick a particular time and date when that came into common usage, but at this point it's in common usage.
Right. Clearance operation is a term that's been used in this case. Can you confirm that as a military term it is or has been used by the United Kingdom, United States, NATO, and other countries?
Yes, sir. I think I have a footnote that acknowledges those sources, but the term clearance operations is commonly used in military circles all around the world.
Very good, thank you. And just to be clear and to remind ourselves, of course, I'm not speaking in Burmese, and the Burmese phrase, in fact, translates, I understand, as area clearance operation. They use that phrase, and also another phrase, counter-terrorism operation. Will you accept that?
I will, on your word, I have no basis to know that.
Now, as to COIN, that's summed up in paragraph 3 of your summary statement Annex tab 4, and I'll just read a bit of it. Authentic counterinsurgency, COIN, requires comprehensive efforts to reassert the sovereign authority of the state with the overall objective of establishing stable and secure peace that protects the civilian population. The civilian population, per se, cannot constitute a lawful military target of COIN. And I accept that. And then how COIN, that is successful, that objective can be reached, or best achieved, you set out at length in your first report. In fact, you set it out over some 15 pages of your first report, Annex 5. And in sum, if I try and summarize it, it comes to this: to confront the insurgents, to establish or re-establish state authority, not to target non-combatants, and, if you like, to win hearts and minds. Would that be a fair summation of what its basic objectives or conduct should be? Or put it another way, is COIN a best practice for counterinsurgency?
The principles of COIN that I outlined are universal across the planet, more or less what you described, minus the hearts and minds part. I didn't use those terms. I don't believe in that term. Hearts and minds is a colloquial term that really is not used commonly in these circles as a professional practice.
All right. But COIN, really, the doctrine of COIN stands really for best practice for counterinsurgency.
I would accept that with variations around the world. Sorry.
Yeah.
Slight variations around the world, yes.
Right. And counterinsurgency, would you accept, in military circles, it is considered one of the most difficult of military operations?
It's difficult in the sense that it requires patience and persistence and adaptation over time, because many times insurgents are changing, so it's difficult in that sense. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Right, thank you. And let's leave aside the instant Myanmar situation for a moment this afternoon. The difficulty of counterinsurgency is reflected in many counterinsurgency operations that have occurred going back many years. You can see that. And many of those counterinsurgency operations have sadly involved all manner of excesses against the civilian population. That's right, isn't it?
I'm not sure I know what you're talking about in particular.
Well, I'm just saying that in many counterinsurgency operations that have been done, even by well-trained and resourced troops from my country and your own country, there have sadly been excesses committed during those counterinsurgency operations.
I would agree with that as a general principle, but I can also think of other examples where the abandonment of counterinsurgency doctrine directly led to entire defeat. South Sudan is an easy example, where the country separated simply because they used excessive force on a widespread basis.
All right, yes. What I'm getting at is that counterinsurgency operations, they don't cease to be counterinsurgency operations because they do not conform with COIN doctrine. That would be right, wouldn't it?
Essentially, it's a bald way of saying that. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, and any your conclusion, by the way of that first report relating to COIN, is that any argument that the Tatwa Dawes clearance operations against the Rohingya represented authentic or appropriate counterinsurgency is not credible. That's your conclusion. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And that opinion as to the application or non-application of COIN is repeated throughout your various formats, from the first report through the second and into the abbreviated summary prepared for this hearing. So your conclusion, your opinion dealing with COIN is it didn't comply.
You ask about dealing with COIN in general or dealing with the application of this doctrine in this setting?
In this set, I said the argument that you say that the argument that the Tatwa Dawes in clearance operations were authentic or appropriate counterinsurgency is not credible. That was your conclusion. I may ask you to confirm that that's the case. Yeah. And I don't disagree. Right? If the civilian population was subjected to the treatment described in the documents you read, the FFM reports, etc., it's clearly not a legitimate use of force, not compliant with COIN doctrine or best practice. So there's no dispute on that. You can't go around willy-nilly killing civilians and targeting civilians. There's no dispute about that. You understand? So on that aspect of your report, the key part of your report, on the documents you read, we don't dispute. Why? Now, in that first report, what is best practice for COIN covers almost the entire 15 pages of that report. But you make absolutely no mention of ARSA, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. You don't mention it once in the entire report. Do you accept that?
That would be a correct statement, yes, sir.
And surely, as an expert, you would have mentioned the insurgents that the counterinsurgency was directed against, or said to be directed against. You'd have mentioned ARSA if you'd known about them in any detail, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily. As I said, my basis of the facts, I had no independent fact-finding ability, was on the entirety of the FFM work. The FFM mentions ARSA in over 340 places. There's a whole section in the FFM discussing ARSA and making the legal determination, making the decision that after 25 August 2017 there was an armed conflict not of an international character. So if you're implying that I was not familiar with ARSA, what I knew of ARSA at that time was derived exclusively from the pages of the FFM, which devotes a great deal of treatment to detailing particular attacks here and there, and the nature of ARSA and the organization such as they knew, etc. So,
well, it's just, you see, I find it surprising that you put in an expert report on this situation of counterinsurgency, and you don't mention the opposition at all. Do you understand why I'm surprised at that?
No, sir. The FFM at that point early on found over 54 villages where this modus operandi had happened and another 22 suspected. And the question I was asked was, can I align this systematic modus operandi by the Tatmadaw with functional counterinsurgency doctrine, legitimate counterinsurgent efforts? And the answer was absolutely not. So the efforts of the ARSA as contained in the FFM were relevant to the fact that there was an insurgency, no question. but that was a fundamental cornerstone. I didn't need that. I proceeded from the premise that there was an insurgency. I accepted the legal analysis of the FFM that there was an armed conflict not of an international character, at least as of 25 August. The question I was asked was to assess the responses, the modus operandi across those 54 verified up to 76 potential villages.
Yeah.
And
we'll
that
come
modus
back
operandi.
to the detail. Excuse me,
Mr.
sir.
President, can counsel be instructed to allow the witness to finish his answer before he interrupts him?
Yes, please.
Aye,
Okay.
Right. Very well. Then you get to see the counter memorial put in by Myanmar, which you say, quote, expanded your knowledge of the relevant events, at paragraph 3 of that opinion. And your second report is largely a recital of the Gambia's memorial and the FFM. But as I understand it, you accept in that second opinion that there was an insurgency at paragraph 10 of the second document, which was something you hadn't said before. And what you say is, Myanmar claims that its second clearance operations were intended to combat and defeat armed ARSA insurgents. To be sure, such an insurgency existed, and Myanmar responded to it. That's it. There's really not very much about ARSA. But you now recognize that there was an insurgency, is that correct?
So I recognized that in August 2020 when I wrote the first opinion, because those facts, as I said, are clearly stated repeatedly in the text of the FFM. That's not negotiable. That's not debatable.
And you say you had read the FFM and not just extracts from the FFM.
The entire FFM,
right?
that's correct. And there's a great deal of references to ARSA in the FFM. There's also a wonderful historical section on how ARSA developed in the ICJ report. So I took as a cornerstone of my analysis, which was what I was asked to do, assess the modus operandi, the pattern of practice post-August 25th against established counterinsurgency doctrine. So spending time in that first opinion debating about the existence of an insurgency was not necessary.
Right.
It was a separate question.
All right. And you now accept clearly there was an insurgency. Did you know or did you accept that ARSA had made attacks in 2016?
Yes, sir. That's clearly stated in the FFM in repeated places.
As to ARSA's capacity, in the second report, you are dismissive, are you not? But you do accept, may I ask you, that the International Crisis Group concluded that by 2016, ARSA had evolved into a professional, well-organized and well-trained group. Did you know that?
I'm not sure what you mean by the fact that I was dismissive. If you can show me where I said that or what I said, I would be happy to address that comment. It was very clear after August 25th of 2017 in the analysis of the FFM that the group met all the requisite requirements to become an armed force in the context of an armed conflict not of an international character, which meant there was an active insurgency, which meant that everything the government did subsequent to that, and during that prior period as well, after the October 2016 attacks, was counterinsurgency. That was my analysis.
And you're aware that ARSA was growing in capacity and size and training, were you?
That was clearly demonstrated by the attacks of August 25th.
Oh. Were you aware that he could call on thousands of people willing to engage in those attacks?
What is the source of that information, sir?
Well, the court has heard it. Were you familiar with that at all in any form?
I don't know that I knew exact numbers until I saw some of the statements attached to the counter memorial, which referenced numbers, etc.
Right. That it was well, let me come to this simple point. ARSA posed a genuine challenge to the government, did it not?
I'm not sure what you mean by genuine challenge to the government. They were an active insurgency that was attacking police posts and other places. So that's a serious insurgency. It's definitely an insurgency, but I'm not sure it's a challenge to the government. They weren't trying to overthrow the government.
Do you agree that in asymmetric warfare, where you've got insurgency, terrorism, guerrilla warfare, these are difficult for a state to confront, are they not? Because of the nature of it. Terrorists just melt away, for example.
Counterinsurgency is, yes, I would agree with that. It is a pernicious problem, particularly in a case like this, where you have a section of the population, in the words of the International Crisis Group, that suffered from hopelessness and despair, so there's a rich recruiting ground right there.
Yeah.
Every sovereign state, in my view, has an absolute right to confront insurgents and restore law and order and restore legitimate government. But at the same time, they have the correlative duty, absolutely at all times, to protect the population, all parts of the population equally.
Right. And these days particularly, for example, in terms of weapons, handmade and sophisticated IEDs, explosive devices, have proved to be very effective, have they not, for insurgents?
That's true in some settings. I'm trying to recall if I see specific. ARSA definitely had, in the language of the FFM, the capacity to make homemade IEDs. I'm not recalling any particular instances of effectiveness of those, but it just may be that I don't remember.
Right. And Rakhine State, given its geography, mountains, jungle-clad hills, the like, it's an ideal ground, isn't it, for insurgents?
I wouldn't agree to that. Insurgents thrive depending on the nature of the organization and the political structure, and terrain is a factor, but there are so many other factors.
Right.
I wouldn't say it's ideal, it's just terrain.
Right. Now, you mentioned ARSA attacks, and you recognize then that ARSA made over 30 coordinated attacks all over Rakhine State, or north of Rakhine State, on the 25th of August, and more the days following. Is that right? You accept that?
Yes, sir. As I said, I accept the facts as stated in the full FFM report.
Right. And it was appropriate for Myanmar to react to it, though you say it should have done so properly. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Myanmar had an absolute sovereign right to conduct military operations directed against the counterinsurgents, which is the first sentence of the rules of engagement posted in the counter memorial.
Right. And do you accept that the number of assets, or the number of troops, that is, dedicated to the insurgency in this area, which I understand was about 1,400, was appropriate for the size of the area that had to, as it were, be the subject of any counterinsurgency?
I wouldn't know that, sir. All I saw were references to the division numbers, and I never saw a counting of the troops. I don't know how many were there.
You accept Rakhine occupies a big area, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
Right. And as for the nature and extent of the counterinsurgency, do you accept, you've mentioned 46 plus some other locations, But do you accept now that instead of the hundreds of locations that have been spoken about earlier on in the pleadings, that now we're only talking about 46 in the evidence? Do you accept that? Or a few more than 46, perhaps?
So I don't know how many you're talking about in total. My factual findings were based on what the FFM said, and the findings there with respect to a modus operandi.
Yeah.
They identified 54 corroborated instances and another 22. And one of the things that jumped out to me in reading the FFM thoroughly are the many places where they say there's allegations of an attack here or there's rumors of an attack here, but they can't be verified, therefore we won't count it. So I'm not sure they had a complete, but they acknowledged we can document these, and some others we can document, just not quite to our satisfaction. So I accept 54 corroborated examples of the modus operandi that I saw.
Yeah. That's out of over 500 there. Do you appreciate that?
That's speculation, sir. I don't know that.
Right. And that 11 of those weren't in 2017. They were in 2016, 9 months earlier. Did you know that?
The FFM says that there were 9 attacks in October 2016, and a separate 30 documented in August 2017.
Did you appreciate that when you wrote those reports, that all the military activity in those localities followed directly on ARSA attacks in those localities or proximate to them? Did you know that? I.e. that no villages not associated with ARSA attacks were subject to direct counter-insurgency? Do you accept that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
That no villages, that the only villages that were the subject of specific evidential attacks, if you like, by the army, entry by the army in counterinsurgency, I should say, no villages that didn't have ARSA attacks were subject to counterinsurgency. In other words, the army only went into villages where there had been ARSA involvement.
I don't accept that, sir. And Indin is a perfect example. There was no attack at Indin, and then the clearance operation followed several days. And there were other villages where the FFM says the same thing, that there was no attack in that place, which led me to conclude that in those specific locations, the Tatmadaw simply decided that there must be ARSA there, we must go in, we must use this kind of force. The modus operandi is so consistent across all those places that it is a direct attack on the civilian population. It can't possibly be equated to a discriminate, focused attack on ARSA.
All right, I'm going to move on because the nature and extent of those attacks has been the subject of considerable evidence already, and time moves on, so I cannot go into it all. But returning to your first statement in 2020, your conclusion, and I've dealt with the coin part of your conclusion, I now come to the other side, the contentious side, I suggest, is this. And this is right from the get-go in your 2020 report at paragraph 29 at tab 5. The only plausible conclusion from the available evidence is that the clearance operations were conceived, coordinated, and conducted with the intention of, this is the quote I want you to pay attention to particularly, destroying the Rohingya population on the basis of their ethnic and religious identity. All right? And just pausing there, and I'm going to run through it fairly briefly and then pose my question. That opinion is then repeated in your second report, May 24, by which time you'd read the counter memorial and certainly any references to ARSA. And your conclusion is that the operations, counterinsurgency operations, were not COIN compliant, but you again say were done to destroy the Rohingya people. And you repeat at every turn in that report, and I'll run through it very quickly, at paragraph 1, 3, 4, words to this effect, that the clearance operations can only be reasonably explained and understood as an organized and determined effort to destroy the Rohingya people. Paragraph 3, to eliminate the Rohingya group, or at least a substantial part of it. Paragraph 9, to destroy the civilian population in whole or in part. Paragraph 10, to destroy the Rohingya. Paragraph 18, a long-desired destruction of the Rohingya. Paragraph 19, the destruction of the group. 24, to destroy. 28, similarly. 30, with the intention of destroying the Rohingya population on the basis of their ethnic and religious identity. And 31 and 33. And your affidavit statement, in this case, at tab 4. It's a distillation, but it says the same thing at paragraph 31. Determined effort by the Tatwadar to destroy the Rohingya people as a group in Myanmar. The findings, in other words, 13 times in that second report, you conclude findings of genocide, which is the issue in this case, and a matter for the judges. Would you agree it's not a matter for military experts' opinion?
For a person who's solely a military expert, but based on this evidence, sir, I absolutely stand by that statement.
Right.
The pattern of attacks, the modus operandi that was consistently followed was focused on that part of the population. The first part of that strategy, which appears over and over and over in the FFM, is to surround a village. A civilian area, mind you, a pure civilian area, not surrounding Rakhine villages, surrounding the Rohingya part. They surrounded it first. Then they began to shoot indiscriminately. That's in the record over and over and over. There's no discrimination there. There's no effort at all to target specific houses or specific individuals. So the panic happens. People have to choose which kid to take. Yeah. Some people are shot in their homes. Some people are shot in the public places by this indiscriminate fire. Let me finish the modus operandi, sir, because that is the basis from which I derive those statements.
Right.
Very clearly. These are attacks not in Rakhine areas. These are attacks in Rohingya areas. They first surround, and many times, based on pre-planning, are attacking simultaneously with different military units at different angles, or sometimes military units in BGP. These are coordinated, pre-planned attacks against Rohingya areas. They surround them, they indiscriminately shoot, then they segregate them. And when I read that, I think of Srebrenica and other examples. They segregate the men and the boys, sometimes slitting their throats while their hands are still bound. As they're doing that, they're taking off groups of women to be gang raped and to be mass raped. As they're doing that, some other people are beginning to set fire to houses. Other people are taking babies from the women's arms and throwing them into those burning houses. Some women who are going off to be raped are forced to throw their children down into wells. And those efforts are part of an extermination campaign. The key thing to me, one of the key things that stuck out in looking at a consistent pattern of practice, that was so they surround, they shoot, they segregate men from boys, families broken apart, people split off from their children. Then they execute. And in doing that, one of the key features that you see over and over and over and over and over again is shooting at fleeing refugees. Pure civilians. There's no discrimination there. People are leaving, they're fleeing, they're refugees, they're moving, and they're still shot at and killed as they flee, followed by mass burnings. And it's notable in the record, and there's satellite evidence to corroborate, that those burnings focused on Rohingya areas.
Right.
There are Rakhine areas left completely untouched, followed by bulldozing, which to me, from my experience in Iraq, makes me think of the Anfal genocide. When you put that pattern together, with no discriminate force used against ARSA targets specifically, the rules of engagement specifically say that civilians, the Tatmadaw must use discriminate force, and that if they're to operate in an urban area, they must ensure the elimination of collateral damage. Based on that modus operandi and that consistent pattern of attacks, which you see over and over and over in varying sequences and all across the area, across the entire system of documented attacks, across that entire system, there's not a mention that we were moving against this place, against this person. Here are the steps we took to warn the civilian population, to alleviate collateral damage. Here's our conclusion as to why we thought this was proportionate in accordance with the rules of engagement. So I learned in the counter memorial that there were rules of engagement. They were not only not followed, they were completely ignored, which is the substantive basis for those statements, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Hopper, I'm reminding you of the time allotted
Yes,
to
yes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Can I then just turn to a final matter? As a lawyer, you know that as an expert, independent of the parties, you shouldn't be seen to usurp the role of the advocate in the proceedings. You know that, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Right. Are you independent of the parties?
As I say, I'm the expert. These are my opinions based on my analysis of the facts, my deeper knowledge of these military practices, and my experience in the real world dealing with insurgencies in a number of countries and various components of the coin problem. So yes, sir, I take it very seriously. This is my analysis and my words over my signature.
Right. Well, let me just run through briefly, and it's my last matter. In 2000, I'll run through it and then pose my question. In 2017, you were selected for the expert roster of Justice Rapid Response, and together with Law Action Worldwide, the founder of which is also an expert with Justice Rapid Response. In May 21, a joint press release was issued by that group, Justice Rapid Response and Law, stating that they were working towards gathering evidence to support the legal cases, which is one of those cases. And also, I think you served as one of the expert advisors to the Genocide Prevention Task Force under the auspices of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which has also been referenced in this case, and also the Public International Law and Policy Group, PILPG. You are a member of that team, PILPG's team, according to their website. And they're the author of documentary exhibits in this case. And PILPG, of which you are a member of its team, is currently providing legal assistance to the National Council of the Union of Burma on the use of legal mechanisms to challenge the legitimacy of the present government in Myanmar, and is in the forefront of the resistance movement against the military junta. That is the NCUB.